I want to show you now an interesting possibility for black, which again I recommended all the way back in 1995. I don't see any reason to change my recommendation today, 12 years later. We're going to go to Belgrade. It's the year 1978, and two grandmasters are contesting this game, Knežević and Velimirović. And here white plays c3 instead of the move e3. Well, against this particular move order, very interesting for black is to take on d4 and then to play the move b5. I didn't see any clear way for white to get an advantage against this move 12 years ago, and I still don't today. With b5, black takes space on the queen side. He takes the square c4 away from white, and he prepares to develop his pieces slightly more ambitiously than the hedgehog system that we previously saw in the last game. It certainly looks like an interesting way for black to play, as you will see. And certainly against a London system trundler who'd like nothing better than a very quiet position where he can slowly build up. Okay, well, white played e3, black played a6. Of course, he's got to defend his pawn. And we get a quiet period of play where both sides are developing their pieces in relatively unhurried fashion. And here's one reason why black should play his pawn up to b5. It gives him more space on the queen side and thus more room to bring out his major pieces. And Velimirović takes advantage of that feature of the position by playing his queen out to b6. Again, a quiet period ensues where both sides are just developing. And now white starts some sort of action with knight e5. Okay, knight to b4, bishop to b1, and I'm sure Velimirović played this move not only to keep pieces on the board, but to enable himself to get rid of that pesky knight on e5. And, well, after d6 the knight must retreat to d3, whereupon black retreated with knight c6. White played a3, doubtless to restrain black's queenside pawns, and black castled. So I think now that both sides have castled, we can summarise the results of this opening. It's perfectly satisfactory for black. He's got all his pieces in play. He can put a rook on the c-file. He's got breaks in the centre. He's got the d5 square, and he's got a potentially very active bishop all the way down the diagonal to g2. So I'm sure if this is the type of position that black can get with b5, then why not employ it, frequently when you get the London system with 4c3. It seems very reasonable. Just taking play on, although probably objectively this position is equal, perhaps it's slightly more pleasant for black to play. Okay, white continued with bishop g5, and black played knight a5, uncovering the bishop on b7. White played knight f4, and g6 was the good reply, perhaps anticipating white's idea of knight h5, which could take advantage of the pin on the knight at f6. Virtually every stage in this game, Velimirović resists premature simplification. Now white goes knight e4, again trying to take advantage of the pin, and black retreats with queen to d8. Knight to c3, rook to c8. We've been expecting this move for quite some time, and now it comes. And queen e2 was played. So a game of chess where black is playing on a fully equal footing. Okay, knight d5, bishop h6, knight takes c3. I think that's the best move before white gets the chance to take on c3, and b takes c3, rook to e8. But now we can start to see reasons why black could think about winning this game. It's the backward pawn at c3. A weakness. White can't dissolve that weakness easily. He's got to try and find compensation elsewhere on the board. And so for this reason, Knežević is provoked into action by playing queen to g4. And now there are certainly some sacrificial possibilities against the g6 pawn, which black heads off by playing the prophylactic move king to h8. Well, bishop to a2. It was easier for black to get rid of his problems than it was for white to actually get rid of this pawn here at c3. That's a permanent weakness. So bishop a2 was played. Now perhaps white has some visions of a sacrifice on e6. Black buys the gift with rook takes c3, and now white knows that he's completely lost in this position unless he manages to unbalance things. So he goes in for bishop takes e6. F takes e6 is played. And now, what to do? If knight takes e6, I think black has queen to c8. He might even have bishop to c8. This is also an interesting move here. So white goes ballistic in this position with bishop g7 check. And of course what he's hoping for is for black to take this bishop, and then knight takes e6 check. He's going to win the queen. Of course the positions reached after that are not at all clear, but Velimirovich is in his element here. Sharp tactical game, and he sidesteps the bishop with king to g8. So now we really do have an interesting situation on the board, because white continued to sacrifice things with knight takes g6. King takes g7. Very courageous. And white played knight to f4 check. Strange looking move, but if knight takes e7 check, it may just be that black can play king h8 in this position. And then amazingly that knight on e7 is actually trapped. So knight f4 check was the best that white could come up with here. He's hoping that the black king is going to stray to f8 or f7. No such luck, because the king goes back into the corner. Knight takes e6, and now we reach the culmination of the white attack here, because white's threatening not only the queen but mate on g7. So how does black answer this? He answers this in typical Velimirovich fashion with rook to g8, the only move. Okay, knight takes d8, and now comes the coup de grace. Bishop takes d8. I'm sure Velimirovich was intending this all along, and in fact it's a winning move, because suddenly the boot is on the other foot, the white queen is skewered against the g2 pawn, and it's now black who has the massive attack, not white. What's white to do? Well, if he moves his queen, rook takes g2 is a killer. So, unfortunately for white, he has to go in for this exchange on g8, whereupon we reach a very unusual material balance of 3 pieces for a rook, which of course isn't really in white's favour, and excuse me, I'm getting the moves wrong here, which isn't really in white's favour, and of course we must adjudge this position as completely lost for white. But he plays on with rook fc1, rook comes to c4, rook takes c4, b takes c4. Well, of course it was a question of choice. I think any move wins here. Knight takes c4 is of course a good move, but Velimirovich is obviously intent on getting a passed pawn there. Rook comes to c1. It's a question of how quickly black can bring his pieces into good positions. Bishop comes into d3. The knight comes in. The rook is no match for the pieces here, and the bishop just comes into d2. Whereupon white resigns. There's no defence, of course, to the advance of the c pawn. So, what can I say? I think b5 is an interesting move on move 5, and may well shake up one of those boring London system players. You can only use it against c3 on move 4, but I recommend that you do so.